Savvy Business Radio, drawing out the best from our guests with our host, Christina Nichman.
Our guest today is Pascal Finette, one of the amazing authors of Jonathan Law's new book, The GuruBook, highlighting 45 of the world's leading entrepreneurs. Find out more about Pascal at finette.com and get the GuruBook today at thegurubook.org. Hi, Pascal. Welcome to Savvy Business Radio. How are you today?
I'm doing exceptionally well. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm very happy to have you here. You are an entrepreneur. You've done wonderful work. You are now have a great book out with a number of wonderful pioneers and entrepreneurs called the GuruBook, Insight from 45 Pioneering Entrepreneurs and Leaders on Business Strategy and Innovation. Very important. A lot of our listeners are business owners of all shapes and sizes, from very beginning to being out there for quite some time and building multi-million-dollar businesses and even larger, and to startup businesses that can learn a lot about the experiences from you and a lot of other people that are alongside of you in the wonderful The GuruBook. Share with our audience, before we get started on some of those tidbits, a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. And by the way, just let me be super clear. The book was written by a dear friend of mine, Jonathan Lowe, who interviewed me for the book. So all credit go to Jonathan. I'm just like the mere part of it. And then just very briefly about myself, I was born in Germany, basically at the right time in the right place. So the first .com boom happened around the time when I was at college. So that led me to start my first venture out of college, raised venture capital, the whole, 9 yards. And since then, I've spent my career basically ping-ponging between building and running my own companies, as well as working for some of the more interesting tech companies in their formative years. So I was at eBay in Germany when there were only about 100 people, and we grew it like just crazy fast. I was at Mozilla, the maker of the Firefox web browser, in their early days when we were about to release Firefox version 2. And then we grew that to 500 million users worldwide. And I was at Google.org, their philanthropic arm. And the last couple of years I've spent at Singularity University, where we teach and inspire and educate leaders on exponential technologies and how they're changing the world we're living in and what to do about this. So it's a pretty fun ride I had so far.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. What would you say is your greatest niche in the business world? That is your greatest gift and skill yourself?
Oh my God. I don't think you want to ask like anyone to talk about like themselves in that way. I don't know. I don't know what my gift is. I probably am pretty good at getting people really fired up to do the thing they need to do.
Well, that's very important. That is very important, because one of the things we hear from a lot of new business owners is they have this passion and they have this gift, but they don't know how to explode into the world. They don't know how to take that action that will bring something to the marketplace, for one, that has a need and desire, but also how to get going on it. And looks like you would be the right person to do that. Share with our audience some of the things you learned along your journey in entrepreneurship that helped you grow as a person and as a business owner.
Yeah, of course. I think, quite frankly, and you hit on an interesting point here, which is really this the art of the start. This like, how do I actually get started? And I see this in my practice as well. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. I used to be a venture capitalist, back in the day. And one thing which stands out to me is, and a dear friend of mine, Mike Smith, has a formula which he calls the 10-80-10 formula, which is 10% of all people are haters. And then 80% of people are people who like to talk about stuff, but actually don't do it. And then 10% are the ones who are doing it. And I think first of all, that's true. So I meet a lot of people, unfortunately, who they like the idea of being an entrepreneur, but they like talking about it, but not actually liking to do it. So that's the first level. And the second level is when you're in the 10% who are doing stuff. I think the two things I learned in my life, and they're really not complicated or magic, they're just really hard to do, which is having the consistency and the persistence to literally like do one step at a time and over and over and over again. So the notion of like just getting started and like moving, one step at a time forward, and understand that whatever you do in terms of entrepreneurship, it's never a sprint. It's always a marathon. I think that's one. And then the second one is the ability to understand what really moves the needle and not do busy work. Right, I see a lot of entrepreneurs who are, they spend like a day designing their business card, and quite frankly, that's fun, and I do it myself, but it doesn't move the needle, of course. So really having the ability to say what matters, and then having the tenacity and the strength to really go like one step at a time. I think those are really two important points.
Yeah, absolutely. And it recalls for me when I first got started in my business, it was my ex-boss who told me, hey, you've been doing this sort of work. You have a great skill in it. And that was really helping businesses find where they're losing money and help them plug up those holes, as it were, and stop the leakage. And I was good at it. And he said, I think you should just open a consulting business. It'll be easy. You'll make great money. And I did just that. My first week, I worked on my website. I built myself. I'm doing these pretty business cards. I'm taking busy action. The one thing that was the most important thing, which is go out there and get the clients, is not what I was doing. And I spent the good first month going, okay, no one's showing up my doorstep. There's my pretty website. I went to 1 or 2 networking events. Where are my clients? And it took me realizing that it takes bigger action than being comfortable. Talk a little bit about what you've learned about getting out there maybe and pushing the envelope a little bit. How did that work out for you?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I mean, it is the hard work, right? And for a lot of us, for example, sales is not something which comes natural. And I describe myself as an ambivert. So I'm actually an introvert by nature. I like when I'm on a stage. I enjoy being on a stage, but I hate the in between, right? So when you say, for example, networking event, this is kind of for me, it's like one of the biggest like nightmares. It's just like it doesn't come natural to me. And yet, of course, it is incredibly important to go to these events, attend them, and do business there. So I think the thing you learn over time is putting yourself out there, and one of the key learnings have, and again, like this is not magic, is the more often you do something, the easier it gets. So the first time it's really terrible, and you're like petrified of like picking up the telephone and cold calling someone, and then like they say no, and you're like crushed. But then you do it again and again and again and again, and then eventually like you take it as a sport, and it becomes much more natural. So really getting out there and having the tenacity to do it over and over again is really important.
Yeah, and one thing I found for myself is it's not nearly as bad as I imagined in my head, either the networking event or the cold call. I mean, there were some people that said, hey, don't call me, and they hung up. But a majority of people were polite and would either say, I'm not interested, or someone would be like, how did you even find me? And because I do a lot of research before I just call people, because I want them to be a target that I know I can serve. I'm not just here to throw my stuff at people that don't need, want, and desire what I have to offer. They were intrigued that I even found them. And they're like, tell me more about how you found me, because I want to, figure out how to get my marketing out there better. And so it opened up a whole conversation, then relationship, and then in some cases, future business. But I like what you said, Pascal, that it's not a one-step process. It's that over and over and over again that I think, at least what I've gathered here is business in the United States, is we've been sold this myth of things are instant gratification, things are instant, immediate, as long as you have that magic formula. And it really doesn't exist.
I 100% agree. There's a really beautiful Indian proverb, which is the question of what is the best way to eat an elephant? And the answer, of course, one bite at a time. And I think that's very true. There's another concept, by the way, in here, which is the idea of compounding returns. So there's a very famous story about the British rowing team, Olympic rowing team, which hasn't won an Olympic rowing event for years and years and years. And in the 2000s, they got a new trainer, and the trainer basically said, like, I don't care about winning. What I want to do is I want to get better at every single thing we're doing, and it just marginally better. So they started asking themselves this question of, will it make the boat go faster? So every time they did anything, like they trained, and they said, the change in the training routine, will it make the boat go faster? The design of the boat, will it make the boat go faster? And so on. And what happens is, by compounding these little 1% increase improvements, because they are compounding, right? They stack on top of each other. You actually get to the outcomes you want. And in this case of the British rowing team, they became the world champions. So there's a beautiful math you can do, which is if you do something and you get just 1% better every single day, at the end of 1 year, you are 38 times as good as you were at the beginning of the year. Right. So exactly to your point, get out there and you will get better and better over time. And it compounds.
Wow, like compound interest. We always think of compounding as in a negative way, in the form of maybe interest, but we don't ever take into effect that the same thing happens with positive things like doing something over and over again, increasing your benefit or your skill little by little. And it's funny because I now have been doing this broadcasting show for 6 years, and I listened back to the first year and it's a little cringy, but it's been 6 years of practice, 6 years of getting better at engaging and learning and growing. And the same goes with business. I mean, my first year was with Touch and Go, and it's the same thing with everything. It's the bit by bit growth. And you go and work out, you see some of the great bodybuilders. They certainly didn't show up at the gym one day and tomorrow they were amazing. It was bit by bit in the gym, increasing their skill and talent bit by bit.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. So you talked also about how so many people you meet end up talking, and they like to talk about the idea, but they don't like to take action about that. And why have you found that to be the case? Is it really because it sounds like a good idea, but they don't have confidence in themselves? What is it?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a mixture. I think there's a confidence piece in there without a question. There's a piece around really not just simply knowing where to start. And this can be very overwhelming, right? If you think about, if you and I decide to like found a company tomorrow here in the US, just the sheer fact of like setting up your LLC, getting payroll set up, like figuring out healthcare, like all this stuff, like figuring out like where's our office, all that is really complicated. And it can become very overwhelming if you look at it as an amalgamation, a conglomerate of all these little things. Instead, of course, what you need to look at it is like you separate them into individual tasks and you say, well, we need to set up payroll. I mean, it's not that complicated, right? And it's like, if you do it like bit by bit, it actually works. But if you look at it as a compound, it's hard. I think that's the second reason. And the third one is, unfortunately and fortunately to a certain extent, in the world of entrepreneurship, I think it's just really cool to be an entrepreneur these days, right? Particularly in the tech industry, if you're a tech entrepreneur, right? So a lot of people like the sound of it, but then when they realize that entrepreneurship, as you know, is a massive sacrifice, right? Like you spend hours on end working, and often the success is not an overnight thing. It takes a while. It is tough, and like people, there's just a lot of people who like talking about it, but don't really want that part of it.
And also, let's talk about the risk. I think if you've been in a position where you've worked for someone else, you've not had to take risk. There's a paycheck you can count on, and it shows up every single time at a certain time. So there's not that risk involved as you starting your own business where now I've got to make it. Nothing's coming through that door unless I go get them, the clients and the sales. And so now that instant paycheck is not guaranteed. That instant income is not guaranteed. And I think for some people, when they begin to get the reality of that, it's scary.
100%. Though, if you turn that on its head, actually, if you are an entrepreneur, your future is probably significantly more secure than if you are an employee. Because quite frankly, particularly here in the US, as an employee, you get fired within days, right? And we see this all the time. It's like, big company decides to do layoffs and boom, like you're standing on the street. And you have no control over this. As an entrepreneur, at the very least, you have full control over yourself, right? So to your earlier point is, if you're an entrepreneur and you don't have enough sales, it is on you to just pick up the damn phone and call people. If you're employed in the sales department and your sales manager decides to not like you anymore or they don't need you anymore, you're out of the door. Nothing you can do.
Absolutely. And really, what it is, and this is something I wish I had done when I got started, is I had kind of seen it. I had gotten to a point where I it wasn't working anymore. I had been in one job after another, was starting to have layoffs. And like you said, I didn't have control over it. It wasn't the fact that, oh, we don't like you. It's like we're getting rid of the whole department. And here I am at the back end of it. And I'd always gotten to a point where I could just find another job within a day or two. But be in another situation, because I couldn't take the time to look because I'd just been out, I would end up taking another position that wasn't right for me, but I just took it. So after the fourth time of going through this, I said, this isn't working for my health, my well-being. And like I said, it was my ex-boss who gave me the idea that you could do this yourself. You don't need to depend on someone else. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Now, and what I realized then, if I could do it over again, is I would have kept a job and built my consulting business and radio show while doing that, because I would have the secure income and then start to build the business and let it go as I built it up. How do you feel about that? What do you tell someone when you're working with them or consulting? Would you tell them stay with the job or just drop it, or does it depend on the person?
I think it depends on the person and the circumstances, of course, and also the kind of business you want to build. Generally speaking, I'm 100% with you, particularly if you build something out like a consultancy business or a service-based business like a design firm or any of those companies. Doing it while you're on the job, while you have like a stable income and a paycheck is, of course, is in a lot of ways is preferable. Also knowing, and I'm pretty sure you would have had war stories to tell about that as well, is it's also pretty hard, right? Because you work your 8-hour shift in your day job, and then you do another 4-hour shift in your new thing. Yeah. I think some businesses, particularly if you build something which has a critical time to market component, or which just needs a lot of effort in terms of like building it, probably require an approach where you need to be in 100%. Otherwise, you can't just do it. So I think it depends really on the circumstance. And of course, if some people have a little bit more of a financial cushion and they can say, it's fine if I don't get salary for a year. Whereas other people don't have that, right? So I think it depends on the person.
And the situation. And one guy had said something to me who's now a very successful business owner. He said, sometimes if you don't go in with both feet and just jump in, you never really do it. You kind of sort of dabble in it. And so he's kind of the opponent of where you really should jump in and let go of whatever kind of net you're holding on to, because that will always make you feel comfortable. And it won't be until you're uncomfortable that you're really going to start to explode and grow. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about when the going gets tough in your business, the question becomes like, how hard are you pushing, right? And if you have like a cushy, nice day job, you will probably are more likely to just give up, right, on your new venture. So I think there's an argument to be made about this. What's interesting is when you study and I have a little bit of a biased sampling set here because I come from the tech industry, so most of my samples are in the tech industry. But if you look at companies in the tech industry, there's pretty much not a single successful company in the tech industry which didn't have a near-death experience sometime earlier in their career. It's true. It's like most companies basically like nearly went bankrupt, like Airbnb, Uber, you name them, and they all basically nearly went bankrupt at one point. And this gets to your point about like, okay, so if that's your company, first of all, like the question is like, how much can you actually drive a company like this by doing it on the side? But the second one is then also how much would you be willing to give for it if your livelihood doesn't hinges on the success.
Those are really, really good points. Now, one thing I found for myself, and I don't know if you went through it with people you've worked with or in the beginnings of your building business, is that I spent a lot of time, but not just time, but finances on things that were not growing me. And that would be maybe marketing in a big newspaper when no one knows who I am yet, or expensive business cards and the such. What do you propose for businesses getting started? Where should their money best be spent? And how do they know where to look like, okay, here's where my money should be spent. Here's where it should not be spent.
Spend all your money on the customer and the product, like literally all your money. There's this wonderful example of, there's a video of Jeff Bezos. It's very well known, by the way. The story is that Jeff Bezos' desk was a former door. So he basically took a door and put it on legs, and had a desk. And even in 1999, when Amazon was already public and like literally billion-dollar company, his desk was still the same door.
Wow.
And there's a 60-minute TV show interview with him, and the host asked him, like, why the heck aren't you buying a decent desk? I mean, you've got all the money in the world. And he's like, it doesn't drive the business. The desk makes no difference to my business, right? So why would I invest money into the desk? And I think it's a really wonderful metaphor for how we should think about these things. Like anything which drives your business, and this is mostly around anything you can do for your customer or your product or service, of course, like invest all the money you have into it, because that's how you grow your business. Anything which doesn't, like your desk, like your fancy office, your beautiful water bottle on the desk, like it doesn't matter. Like just don't put money into it.
I love that you say that. It's very funny because I in the beginning were focused on the wrong thing. And one of the biggest challenges I made is I would see folks who were hugely more successful than I was at first because they've been doing this for a while. And I would try to copy them. I would have big events in Manhattan where I would bring people in to do workshops, help them with their business, but, rent a hotel in Manhattan. And, it was my friends going, you don't have the money for this. You're putting money into this, where there are more efficient ways to help your customer than bringing them into a hotel of which you can't afford and doing these events. Now, the people you're modeling after and seeing them do this have been in business 20 years or whatever. They have the means to do this. Focus on delivering what you have to your customer in the best fashion, in the most efficient way. And it's interesting, when I started asking my clients what they needed, a lot of them were strapped. They're already sometimes leaving corporate or just starting their business. They have kids at home. Coming out to an event in Manhattan is not efficient. They have kids they have to get a babysitter for. They have to drive and spend money on a car, gas. And it was more efficient to do it online, and not to mention cheaper for me and cheaper for my client. So I like your story here because it really shows the efficiency, not the, oh, look what they're doing, let me do what they're doing.
Right. And by the way, just let me add another perspective to that, which is sometimes you want to go over the top, right? So I have this wonderful story of an entrepreneur who wanted to meet a potential client, and the client was coming into town, and he knew that the client likes to shop at Brooks Brothers. And the client was like, his flight was delayed, and the client was super grumpy. And what the entrepreneur wanted to do first is he wanted to take him out to a ball game, because that's exactly what you described. It's like what all the other people were doing, right? It's like the classic thing. You take them to the ball game, you wine and dine them, and then you hopefully get the client. And that would have cost him, I don't know, like $1,000 or something, right? But he decided to go totally over the top. So he went to so his potential client came in late. So he drove to Brooks Brothers, basically bought half the Brooks Brothers store, brought the whole collection into his hotel, and said, listen, I know that you like to shop at Brooks Brothers. I know that you came in late. You didn't have time to go shopping. I brought you a Brooks Brothers store. Just pick what you want. And the client, is crazy, right? And the potential client, of course, was so blown away by the thoughtfulness and the going above and beyond that, ultimately became a customer. So sometimes I think if you're doing it deliberate and you're doing it very smart, it does make sense to overspend, but be clear and be deliberate about it.
Well, what I'm getting there also, Pascal, from your story is that he didn't do exactly what everyone was doing. He went outside the box. He said, what does my client need or want or desire? And I'm going to give them what they want, but go far and beyond what they'd ever expect. So it's not just taking them to a ball game, doing what everyone else was doing. He said, what is that client? What is most important to them? And I'm going to give them that experience or thing that they most desire.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that is really that. Now that's a good story, because it's spending your money wisely and efficiently and then doing what's best for your client. Now, have you run across either working with people or yourself where things didn't quite work out and you had a disgruntled client? How did you work on making them happy and getting them to realize that, yes, I'm here for you and we can make this better? Oh,
yeah, sure. It happens all the time, of course. Especially the more work you do, the more likely you screw it up somewhere. What I found, at least in my case, always just literally the most important thing is to be completely open, transparent with your client, to be upfront about things. So don't try to like put things, like hide them under the rug and wait until the last minute to tell them. Or you might have heard about the shit sandwich. So you deliver good news to your customer, then your bad news, and then a good news, and then like in theory, like they forget about the bad news, right? Which is of course not true. So I found like just being super upfront about like whatever goes wrong, like be super upfront about it. Do your utmost best to make it right by your customer. Always do the right by your customer. And just be be human, like be apologetic. Because what I found is, every once in a while you have a customer who's like, they're just jerks ultimately, right? And like you can't, whatever you do, you can't do it right by them. But the vast amount of people, if you're human and if you're like genuinely like trying to do right by them, they will look at this and say, okay, I get it. Stuff happens, like we all make mistakes. It's fine. So it is, again, like it goes back to this. It's really not that complicated. It's just hard. It's like you need to do the right thing.
Yeah, I love that you say that. I remember early on when we started doing our advertising for clients, we had a wonderful group that came on that was going to use our platform to help launch their new product. And what ended up happening the day we launched their campaign is our server just went kaput and stopped working. And of course, they don't care.
Sure.
They want their campaign to start on time. Now, of course, it's running for a full month. It was just the first couple hours. It wasn't up and running. But they felt that was a major egregious thing that they paid for the full time in their first couple hours. No one, that's when people are most excited. The campaign's launched. They're telling people about it. They might be clicking on. They're not able to hear their campaign. So I got on the phone with them. We just troubleshooted. I said, what can we do to make this better? Would you like to run an interview with us? Would you like to run a different ad spot? Like we talked it over and we gave them something that would work for them. They were very happy. They said, you gave more than we expected. We expected you to give us excuses. And that's the key point that I see a lot of people and businesses make. Even with myself, I have a bad experience. I explain it to them and they're trying to make excuses. I don't care about your excuses. I don't care the server went down. I don't care that your shop had a problem. There was a storm. I want, what I paid for. And so I think if, like you said, if you're human, you let them know that I hear you. I'm with you. What can we do to make this better for you? And you listen to them out and you find something that works for both of you. It can be great. I mean, their actual event launch, and they said it was due to our wonderful campaign that we helped build with them, but it was working with them as a team.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. 100% agree.
Yeah.
That's exactly the approach.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fascinating. I don't want people to leave without finding out how they can find out more about you and get the wonderful book, the GuruBook.
Yeah. So the GuruBook, of course, you get this at your preferred bookseller of choice. I'm sure Jeff Bezos will gladly sell you one. And if you want to get in touch with me, I'm a pretty sociable person. And interesting enough, my name is to the best of my knowledge, at least, the only Pascal Finette in the world who is, at least online. So literally, you punch in my name into the wonderful Google search engine, and you will find my website. And on my website are my contact details. You find all my social media, etc. So very easy to find.
Wonderful, wonderful. And you can also you can go to thegurubook.org, find out more about what the book and the wonderful people who have also been pioneers in sharing their wonderful thoughts like you have. And I just have to thank you, Pascal, for sharing your wonderful wisdom today on Savvy Business Radio. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Savvy Business Radio broadcasts worldwide via a large podcast network, celebrating business owners, entrepreneurs, influencers, and successful individuals. Find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or how to become a guest. Call 732-474-7375 or email Christina@savvybusinessradio.com.